Oh, good morning, everybody. I think it's still morning even on the East Coast. I'm Kevin Baxter. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for the NCEA, and it's my honor to be the moderator of this very esteemed and wonderful panel that we have with you today. We've been very proud of the legal issues workshop that we've had yesterday and today. Hopefully, many of you have seen the sessions, both from yesterday and this morning. We had Sister Dale, and this afternoon we have Joy Lopez after we conclude here. So, some great resources and materials that have been shared. So, hopefully you've availed yourselves of those. If you haven't yet, they are on demand, so you obviously can go back and check those out at your convenience. We're going to share with you people's experience, the panelists' expertise in terms of where things are. We're going to talk all about things related to the COVID-19 pandemic and the shutdown of schools and that how that's impacted Catholic schools across the country. And then we're also going to talk about the coming school year and how people are thinking about reopening and all those questions that we're addressing in terms of the restart of school, which I know is on everybody's mind. So to start, I'm going to just go through and have our panelists introduce themselves, give you a little bit about themselves, and then we will go into some questions. So I'm going to start with Father Bill Hammer.
You already mentioned my name, Father Bill Hammer. I'm a pastor in Louisville, Kentucky, of a suburban parish. We actually, at this time, have the largest elementary school in our archdiocese. We have over 700 students, junior kindergarten through 8th grade. So it's a complex, a lot of families and a lot of things going on as well. So that's my context, is suburban as opposed to urban or rural.
Thanks, Father Bill. Dr. Karen Giuliano.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Karen Giuliano. I'm principal of Lord High School in Rochester, Minnesota. We are the only high school. We're a system of 5 schools. We have the high school and we have the elementary schools, some of which are pre-K to 8. We have pre-K to 5. So it's an interesting thing. We're a system within the Diocese of Winona, Rochester.
Great. Dr. Rob Mullen. You're muted, Rob.
I'm sorry.
There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yep, you're great.
I don't know if I'm great, but I am Rob Mullen. I'm the president of Trinity High School in Louisville, Kentucky. We're an all-boys high school, 9 through 12. Depending on who shows up next month, we might have around 1,250 fellows. This is in October will be my 20th year as president of the school, my 38th year overall. And I have the pleasure of knowing Father Bill, who's one of our rock star pastors, and Lisa Schultz, who's the best superintendent in the nation.
That's great. Thank you very much, Rob. Dr. Dave Peters.
Hello, my name is David Peters, and I'm head of school at Mount Michael Benedictine School. We're in Elkhorn, Nebraska, right outside Omaha. We are boarding and day school. We have approximately 240 boys that attend. Some from all over the country, all over the world. And July 1st, I started my 10th year at Mount Michael.
Great. Thanks, David. Lisa Schultz.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Schultz, Superintendent of Schools for the Archdiocese of Louisville. We have 9 Catholic high schools and 39 elementary schools. And this past school year, we educated about 19,000 students, pre-K through grade 12. I'm a native Louisvillian. Everything that I know has been here in the Archdiocese of Louisville as a teacher, principal, assistant superintendent, and I've served now as superintendent for the last 22 years. And I'm sorry that we're not able to welcome all of you here personally to Louisville. We always enjoy hosting the Law Symposium every summer.
Thanks, Lisa. And Nicole Johnson.
Hi, my name is Nicole Johnson. I'm a principal at St. Aloysius Elementary School in South LA. We serve students as young as 2 up to 8th grade. I've been at St. Aloysius for 18 years, 5 as a teacher and 13 as a principal.
Great. Thanks very much, Nicole. So there is lots to talk about, obviously, in terms of where things are. I want to just echo something that Lisa said. It's obviously really hard not to be in person. Many of you who are tuned in have been to the Law Symposium that takes place in Louisville every year. And I welcomed everyone yesterday before we started and said, we're all missing the hot brown, you know, at the Brown Hotel. So I know that that's something people really enjoy, and we look forward to getting back in person in the future. When Sister Angie wanted to try to do this, it's really just to make sure that we do the best we can with what we have. We know nothing will match not being in person, but we're hoping to provide some information and some helpful information for those who are tuning in. So the first question, I'm going to start kind of in reverse order, and I'll start with you, Nicole, with the shutdown happening in March. Kind of what happened with your school? You're an urban school. You've got some of those realities that you're dealing with. The transition to remote learning, and how did that work for you? And what did you learn through that process?
You know, we are a blended learning school. So our school, about 4 years ago, we went through the LMU's Ideal Institute blended program. So all of our teachers were trained in implementing blended learning into the classroom. So it was a pretty seamless transition for us. We kind of had it in our radar that we were going to be closing. We didn't get the official announcement until maybe 4 p.m. in the evening that, you know, they were hoping that we would close the following Monday, and that was a Thursday that we were notified. We prepared ourselves just in case. So we thankfully have devices on campus. So within a matter of 2 hours, we got our AUPs, our acceptable use policy out and signed by our parents, and we sent devices home. All of our devices are equipped with Wi-Fi capabilities. So whether or not our lower income families have the ability to have internet in their homes, they were able to take a device with them. So we closed officially on Thursday, March 13th, and we are up and running on that following Monday, the 16th. With all of our classes, through Google Classroom, and our students as young as preschool to 8th grade were in their virtual distance learning community by that Monday.
That's great. What did you learn through that process? I mean, that's such a rapid, we're seeing in the press a lot now about schools and public schools or other schools that really didn't make that transition for weeks or maybe even months, that took really time to do that. And yet what you just described is something, and I think maybe other educators on the panel understand this as well. Catholic schools seem to make that transition really quickly. Why do you think that was? And what did you learn through that process?
I think the support of the community, our school, we definitely have, it's a family environment. And so we're very supportive with one another. I do have some, 3 of my teachers are brand new teachers, 2 of which were in their first year of educating. So for them, it was a bit of a transition in kind of scaling back. We want to set high expectations, but at the same time, we don't want to overwhelm parents. So there was some panic. It wasn't as, we did get launched very quickly, but that doesn't mean everything was smooth from that point on. There was some panic by parents, teachers, students. It was a big adjustment for all of us. So, the main takeaway from that was just the flexibility, just being flexible with our families, knowing that especially in the inner city, there's different dynamics of these families. So, we had, for instance, we had come up with a system of, all students would be assigned work during that day and they would have to turn everything in by 8 p.m. By the time we got to the end of the year, we completely adjusted that and just said, look, if they get it in, if they at least check in somehow, we're going to, count that as work for the day. We don't know what their schedule may be like. We don't know if they're at mom's house or dad's house, if they have a device, if they don't have a device. So it was just a lot of support, and me just reminding the teachers, the students, the parents that we're flexible. If there's an issue that comes up, if your kids are just done and they're burnt out for the day, then let us know, and we'll turn that work in tomorrow. So just really just being flexible and supportive of everyone involved. And I think that really helped. That helped with the smooth transition.
Great, thanks. Father Bill, from a pastor's perspective, and you mentioned a suburban school, how did that transition happen for you and the school, and in terms of the smoothness or the lack thereof of that transition to remote learning?
My observations would be, in that role as a pastor, not completely immersed in that process, but I am blessed to have a very strong principal, and we do work very well together and met very consistently throughout that process. So she would use me as a sounding board, and then I could also give her, some feedback on a non-parent's, point of view and that type of thing. But I think our experience was not that I'm using a double negative there. Our experience was very similar to what Nicole just described. Our transition initially, I think, was pretty seamless. Our members, as a rule, have a lot of resources, technology resources, many in their own homes. Many of our parents certainly working in that environment. But what I observed and heard, I think, pretty quickly, we've been doing remote learning for 5, 6, 7 years in our parish on what we would call snow days. So that's usually a one-time or a two-time type of event, 1 day or 2 days in a row, at least our area. We can get snow days and you're out of school, so it's not a lost day. And so we kind of approached it, you'd give kids a significant amount of work to do and already be out there online for a snow day. Well, we came to realize that was not sustainable for the long haul in terms of the workload that they were being given, especially if you're given, a full load of 6 or 7 different classes accomplished in a day. Even again with some of our family's resources, you still might have only 1 or 2 computers, you have 3, 4 kids, and having to share computers. And many of our kids had to share the computers with their parents because the parents were home working. And so we did get feedback after a couple weeks that the parents themselves were experiencing a tremendous amount of stress from a lot of our parents. And so, as Nicole described, my principal, I do know, met remotely with a number of our teachers and talked about how we now have to reevaluate our expectations when it's going to be this long of a haul, and as it become to involve. But even with our people as a whole being very comfortable in that electronic environment and learning environment and work environment, we did have to readjust our expectations. And particularly, again, we went out, sort of middle March. And so again, it was almost 2.5 months till middle May. Originally, our school was scheduled to go to the end of May, just normally. And we came to realize it was no longer productive by about middle May. And so we did opt to shut down a week or 10 days earlier than we had originally scheduled, we thought. So that would be some of the learnings we learned from it. And as we're looking at, starting up in August, I think our teachers will hopefully have from that experience. And again, some of our teachers are parents too. And so they were not only teaching all day, but trying to supervise their own children at home. And that was a big learning lesson from them. And then we've all seen the memes that were out there about how parents, in the role of teacher, were ready to expel their kids, ready to, send them, graduate them, within a week of school. They need to go to the next teacher, those kind of experiences. So one of the things that take away, our parents have a much greater appreciation of what it takes to be a teacher.
That's great. How do you give your own kid detention? Is that the deal?
Yep.
Thanks for that. Karen, so in Rochester Lourdes High School, how did that transition work at the high school level for you?
Actually, it went better than expected. We had that whole snow day issue anyway, so we were out 10 days last year. So we had put in a provision that after 3, we go remotely. So we were sort of prepared, but we were very fortunate that Dr. Joy Lopez and Dr. Diane Eby had a plan that they had put in place. So we took that plan and we were able to doctor it up to fit our schedule. And we went out March 13th as well, but on the 16th and 17th, we used those as teacher days. We had our IT person
think we just lost Karen, unfortunately. Hopefully, Karen, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there.
Okay.
The public school did not start right away, so we had to jump on them by about 8 days before spring break. So we were able to survey our teachers, survey the students and the parents, and modified it. We had faculty meetings every week. The administrators dropped into the Zoom classrooms every single day. So there was a lot of, let's say, supervision going on, even though it wasn't obvious. The only issue that we had, or the major issue that we had, is we had some students in the senior level taking pictures while they were online. So we had to deal with that because we did not have the technology piece incorporated. We do now. So with further, online, we will have a technology piece. Other than that, we were overwhelmingly pleased with the surveys with the parents and the students did. They said they never worked harder, which is good. And we had between a 96 and a 98% attendance rate, which is also our IEPs, our plans were all addressed by counselors, and they had a Wednesday of each week was dedicated to testing and to counseling. The issue that we're dealing with moving forward is how to incorporate a testing piece into it, because we did not really have that. We were depending on Google, and the one place that we went to for the testing had already taken all the seats. So we do have to do that moving forward.
That's a great point, and I think we'll get into that maybe a little bit later, but the assessment piece, I know, especially at the high school level, seems to be a major concern if remote has to continue into the fall at all. So we can talk about that down the line. Lisa, my joking line has been, and for those who don't know, I was a superintendent in Los Angeles for 10 years prior to taking this position, is that I'm glad I made the transition when I did. Because I can imagine, the intensity of trying to juggle all the schools and the reality and the PPP funds. And so how has it been from the superintendent's chair, your experience the last few months and the transitions that you've seen?
Yeah, it's been really, really interesting, and I think very challenging ways and very joyful ways. Our schools all did fabulous jobs in terms of pivoting. As Father Bill mentioned, we thought ourselves very progressive, 5, 6, 7 years ago when we came up with remote learning for inclement weather days and have allowed like up to 5 days for snow or emergencies that we would have. So when we knew that we were going to have to go out on March 16th, we had 2 weeks until our spring break. So at some of our meetings with our elementary folks, we talked about, well, we'll probably be out. And I very naively, just myself, was thinking, okay, well, it's just going to be a couple of weeks, and then, we'll kind of have spring break, and then we'll be back in school. Well, lesson learned, in terms of we're not in control of this, and so how do we move forward? So our experience in talking with our schools very similar. We had activities, everything from schools with packets to very sophisticated remote learning protocols that they worked with students. We came out strong, too strong, so that in those first 2 weeks and over spring break, everybody regrouped. We went through May 15th, and throughout that, we found our role at the central office really changing. We had provided resource and support for what we've typically expected to be a typical school year. And in that situation, our school leaders needed us to be different. We worked with them because our grading and assessment policies that worked for a traditional year didn't work here. So we needed to resource and work with them really minute by minute, day by day, just being willing to pivot and to grant those exceptions to policies and protocols to ultimately do what was in the best interest of students and our educators and our parents. And I think we've done that well, and that's been very challenging, but also very exciting at times, because sometimes you get lulled into, here's the typical year, the typical schedule, and I'm a planner, so I always had stuff on the calendar. And so certainly COVID-19, just threw that right out, the window. So how do we learn to lead and communicate and lead in different ways? And we are still learning, and we're learning together, because that's how we're going to get through all of this.
Great. That great message of being together and learning together is wonderful. Dave, I'm going to come to you, and you can obviously comment on anything about the transition, but I also want to kind of move in a direction too about thinking of the future and how you're thinking about opening. There's a line that I've been using a lot, so if people listen to the podcast and other things, they've heard me say it a lot, but and I credit Kristen Dixon, who's the superintendent in Seattle, for giving me this. But she said early on when I was having a conversation with her that she made a choice, or she's making a choice, not to focus on what might be dying through this process, but rather what's trying to be born. And so how are you looking at this in Nebraska in terms of your school and thinking about, as tragic as it all is and as difficult as it all has been, how are you taking what's happened as a learning experience? You just muted, Dave. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Here in Elkhorn, we're a boarding school, so it's a little different for us. And as we're moving forward, we've been sending updates and emails to our families, to our staff, updating them. We've had teams working on different preparation things and focusing on our community. When we surveyed our parents and we surveyed our students, asking them how everything ended the year, how did you feel, how did you feel? The weak area that we saw was that there was a disconnect, that the parents felt that the boys were coming disconnected from one another, that they weren't as connected because of the environment that we have here. And we know, just for the 50 years we've been in existence and working with our families and working with our alums, that it's kind of the brotherhood of being a boarding and day school, of the boys being together. So that was worrisome to us, because that's kind of central to what we're about. And so going forward, our focus has been on what can we retain that's been our core values here. We're Benedictine. We want to make sure that we continue. We do a weekly chapel as we go forward. We want to keep doing that. Even if we can't be together in the chapel, we're going to make sure that that chapel is filmed, usually as one of our monastic members. So going into the year, we want to make sure we unify through things like that. We are going to have our boarding program. It's going to look a little bit different, but we're still having it. And when we sent that out, we heard just such a positive response from our families and from our boys that we were going to do that. It's going to be a little different. It's going to be a little difficult, but we're still going to do it. So going forward, we looked back at the things that make us strong, and those are the things that we want to press as we go forward.
Great. Thank you so much. And Rob, you mentioned you had 1,250 boys. So that's a lot of boys coming to your campus in the fall. And so how are you thinking about that in terms of the reality, and maybe describe a little bit about, what's the status of the virus in Louisville right now, and kind of what are you thinking about starting school in a month or so?
One of the things I'm learning about this is don't think too far ahead. Like I know what I'm doing about 2 o'clock today. I've been doing this a long time. I've never seen a circumstance that the variables change as often as they are, and trying to plan in that environment is really, really difficult. Our governor has gotten a lot of praise for early on trying to get people to be smart, and our numbers are really good, except yesterday they skyrocketed. And he's coming out today with probably some more stringent recommendations for people to follow. So it's really hard to tell here what school is going to look like in the middle of August. And it's difficult to plan in that regard. I like what Karen said and David said, great response from the spring, but there are reasons why people attend our schools other than just the academics. Uh, the Christian environment, the brotherhood, the ability to grow in ways that can occur beyond just geometry and Shakespeare. So how do you figure out whether you have 100 or 1,200 students to pull that off in a successful way at the same time when, while there's a hunger on the part of students and faculty and staff to be back together again, there is severe concern for people's health. We have kids in vulnerable situations. We have parents, grandparents. So how do you do this when things are skyrocketing and spiraling in areas that today looks terrible? And Kentucky is not as bad as some other areas. So trying to balance those things and trying to figure out how to do it. How do you bring in a certain number of students each day and do all of the temperature taking and the self-assessment? How do you set up classrooms that are appropriately spaced? How do you do lunch? How do you do after school activities? Yeah, those are problems that all of us are trying to wrestle with. Meanwhile, how do you sustain, how do you maintain the reasons why we exist in the first place? There's never been a time in my life where we've had to struggle with these kinds of things. Fortunately, I'm surrounded by really talented, dedicated people and folks like Lisa who help pull together schools that really compete with each other a lot on the secondary level to collaborate and share ideas. So I'm certain that the concerns that keep us up at night are the same things in every pocket of this country. And the more this kind of sharing takes place, the more we can give tips to each other about how to pull this off, the better we will all be, especially for the sake of our students, but also for our colleagues. I have folks who are really, really worried about their own health and the health of their families.
Thanks for that, Rob. And that makes a really great opportunity to transition because we're getting some questions in the Q&A and the chat about moving forward. And one in particular is really about teachers and their comfort level. Obviously, there's a lot of push about getting kids back in school, and there's some evidence that kids, obviously aren't at much risk of severe complications from COVID as older people. We know that, but it's the teachers, it's the kids going to school, contracting, bringing it home to maybe an older relative, those types of things. So Karen, let's maybe move to you a little bit about this. How do you think about this in terms of your teachers and your staff and how to make sure that they have comfort? And if you can, some of the legal aspects of this too. Are there things that you're doing from a legal perspective about either, I don't want to say protecting the school, but protecting your staff as well as kind of thinking of the institution itself?
Well, some of the issues that have come up on a diocesan basis in terms of faculty who may not be comfortable returning. What do we do with them? What are our legal right as an institution who is hiring them, and what is their legal right as participants in their contract? So that's still out. We don't know. We know one of our local public school districts has done a survey and 10% of their teachers are refusing to return. So we don't know how that's going to impact us, but we're trying to make some provisions. And especially on the high school level, you can't just get a sub unless they're a sub in that particular subject area. So the flexibility is not there. We are anticipating returning as half a school. But again, those have not been finalized because the state is not going to come out with their recommendations until July 27th. So we don't even know if we can do that. It's going to be very, very tricky for us. And we need to stay within the law, obviously, but we still don't know what that's going to mean. We're following CDC, but nobody has a plan that we can just jump on and use. I'm very concerned, though, about the teacher aspect of it and how many of our teachers will return and how we're going to remotely teach those kids who are at risk because we have some students who have some immunology issues that may cause them not to be able to return. How are we going to address that as well? Because Zoom is only as good as what you can control. When the teacher's up there, it's not like you have a delay where you can correct something and then go on. So we have to be very careful on how we live stream if we have to end up doing that.
Father Bill, as a pastor too, you're obviously concerned about the pastoral health of your parishioners and your teachers and your staff. So how are you kind of maybe counseling them if they're bringing concerns to you, or how are you thinking about making sure that you have everyone protected if you're going to start school in person at some point, obviously in the fall?
Well, one of my starting points has always been we try to practice stewardship in the sense that everything in our parish is a parish ministry, and everybody's into supporting that. So, for instance, the school is not an apart set of standalone program in our parish. A lot of parishes where it is set up that way, and there's either like a board of directors or a administrator who basically runs the school. I am directly involved in aspects of the leadership. I am not the principal. Thank God I'm not the principal. But having said that, I work very closely with my principal and with me. So some of the things that we're looking at, and again, we are looking very much to our superintendent, Lisa Schultz on here, and the Archdiocese itself, it has been sending out some guidance on personnel matters. And so they're still not completely finalized, but I'm looking, I have to have people who are much better trained in those aspects than I am by my training. So on my end, we're looking at is trying to create space that is safe, for everyone, including the parishioners who don't even have children in their school. So, for instance, our school, as I mentioned, is an elementary school. It's over 700 students. We have 3 classrooms of every grade, which means we've got in those classrooms oftentimes, ordinarily, 26, 27, 28 kids. We'll cap it at 30. Well, we cannot put 28 kids, say, in one of our classrooms safely in terms of allowing distance. And again, the older kids can probably wear masks. They will whine, complain, and try to avoid it. But regardless, we need to get our classrooms down to about 20 to maybe 21, 22 students. So in effect, to do that, we have to find about 6 or 7 more classrooms. And we don't have any empty classrooms to begin with. We have no empty classrooms. So we've got to take about 5, 6 kids, out of every grade classroom. So, instead of having 3 third grades, I need to have 4 third grades. And the personnel issue is, first of all, where do I find 6 or 7 more teachers? And then if one does get sick, and I've noticed in one of the chats, what happens if a teacher contracts COVID? The pool of substitutes is going to be pretty non-existent, I would suspect. Because anybody who can sub long term is going to be teaching. So what we are doing, look like areas that ordinarily the parish tends to use more art from the school. Like, for instance, we have a room we call a hospitality room. But that's a meeting room. And it can seat up to about 200 chairs. We can put in there like a bereavement meals of 100, 150 people very comfortably. Well, we're going to make that into a classroom, which means that the parish has got to sacrifice. It can no longer have the bereavement meal on site now. So we're going to have to figure out ways to adapt. The same would be, with the question came somewhere on the line about serving food. Well, we're going to have to go box lunches, which means, in fact, our cafeteria will not be used for seating kids. So we're thinking about, trying to partition off car enough. So, but we got to still come with a whole lot more. So that's where it comes in. The parish as a whole is going to have to sacrifice. There are some regular activities that are not going to be able to meet as they would normally do, but we're going to start trying to encouraging those to also do their Zoom meetings and things like that. But that's where it's a help that we're not a standalone school. The parish is there to help and to provide additional space. But it means all of us are going to have to sacrifice too. Parish activities we have to sacrifice along with a lot of school activities too. They're not going to be able to have an art room dedicated just to art. But for instance, you can't get 25 kids in there shoulder to shoulder do art. So that's just one example among many. So our library will probably cease functioning short term as a library. It might become a classroom because you're not going to want to have kids putting their hands all over the same books. So you still have to give reading encouragement. I'm giving different examples, but that's how we're trying to think right now. But our library in the past served as an evening meeting room for the parish. No longer is that going to be possible. So it's going to be a back and forth, and that's how we're going to have to learn about it together. A bit of a long answer, but trying to help at least give some ideas how, as a parish, we're going to have to all be in this together.
I think that's right. And I think you're talk about the flexibility and shifts and all those things. And it's obviously it's a parish-wide impact. It's not just thinking of the school, it's the parish meetings, et cetera. Nicole, I just want to come to you too, because as the kind of an elementary school principal, and I think about this and there are challenges at every grade level, obviously, and high school has its challenges. But I just think about like young kids, especially how much contact they have with each other, and, and the best of circumstances without COVID, we often talk about germ factories, in the first and second grade classrooms, and teachers have to build up that immunity when they come back to school every year. So it has to be something. How are you thinking about that in terms of what those classrooms must look like in the fall, and your teachers expressing concern about that?
So we, like I mentioned before, we have a preschool. So we have kids as young as 2 on our campus. And the majority, that class is a pretty small class as far as enrollment. 4 of which the 9 students are staff students. So obviously there is a lot of concern there because they're some of our own students of our faculty. We had originally combined our preschool and TK. So we were going to have students from 2 to 4 together, and the class would have been about 18 students. We then decided instead, and this was a financial issue, obviously, and Kevin, the financial limitations of our school being an inner city school in South Central. But what we decided to do instead was to split the preschool and TK up, and I now will have a preschool that's consistent of 9 students, and a TK that will have roughly 10 or 11 students, and that would allow for more spacing. Our requirement is to have the students on masks, but we're giving the younger students the option of wearing shields. So what we did was we purchased shields for all of our preschool and TK students, and then I purchased some in bulk that we're going to give them to the preschool and TK students, because the reality is a 2, 3, I have a 6-year-old even, they're not going to keep a mask on. My own 6-year-old who attends school here, she has a heart condition, and she already has limited functioning with her oxygen levels, so she can't wear a mask all day. So we're giving the option to families. We're going to be giving the shields to the little, the preschool and TK students, and then I just purchased some shields at a very low cost in bulk that I will have here on campus, because parents had expressed the concern, that if we could just have them here on campus for them to purchase from us. So I have purchased some for parents to have on campus. The way that we're going to be designing our day is we're doing a hybrid model, and this was all through the discussions with parents. I've involved parents in this 100% of the time. So we've been doing throughout this time, and our distance learning went from March 13th. We didn't get out of school until June 18th. So our year was pretty long. So every 2 weeks, I did bi-weekly parent Zoom meetings. All parents were invited to attend just to bring up any questions or concerns. And then I involved them in all the decision making. So I did frequent surveys to ask them, if they would prefer to do half days, if they would prefer to do 2 full days, with 2 full days and split the classes up. And so overwhelmed. And then we're also doing a completely virtual model. So throughout the surveys, what the parents chose was about 60% of the parents chose to do half day models. So we'll have a morning session from 8 to 11, and then an afternoon session from 12:30 to 3:30. And then about 25% of our students and parents have chosen to remain completely virtual. So we're trying to have no more than 15 students in a class at a time, which will definitely allow for the spacing. And then the completely virtual students, they will all attend virtually our morning session. So they will be Zooming into all of our classes from 8 to 11. So they will get the instruction as if they were sitting in the classroom with a teacher. And then we're going to continue to follow the blended learning model. So while the students are in school, they will do our teacher-led instruction and our collaborative instruction at a distance, obviously. And then when they go home, they'll be doing their tech and independent rotations, which is part of the blended learning model. And then on top of that, we're going to be having an enrichment class with a blended learning coach or a distance learning coach. And that will be for our parents who are full-time working parents. So that's going to be in our hall and our cafeteria, which we obviously won't be using in the coming year. So the students who don't have anywhere to go and their parents are full-time working parents, they will go into that space and be obviously distanced from one another, and they'll have a distance learning coach in there who will help them to do their work that they would traditionally been doing at home.
Great. It's so much to think about and so many contingencies. I know that's a lot. Thanks for sharing. Rob, you want to talk about contact tracing a little bit?
Yes, there was a comment in the chat section that caused me to think of something. And this kind of goes back to what you mentioned in that quote at the beginning, Kevin. About 3 minutes out of every 60 minutes of an hour, I get excited about new ideas that are coming and that sort of thing. The other time I'm wrinkling my forehead thinking, how are we going to do this? But there are neat things that are popping up that people come up with or we get approached with that become really great solutions that may not always apply to this pandemic, but can certainly be used in the future. One of those is this whole issue about whatever size school we have, what happens if somebody tests positive or shows symptoms? What in the world do you do, and what are the guidelines for your particular community and that sort of thing? And Louisville is still trying to figure that out. But something just came to us this morning talking about an app. Many of y'all might already have this or are familiar with it, that students and employees can download, and it has the CDC symptoms, and then you check through if you're clear on all of those, and then if not, it sends you to another way to not go to school and so forth. But one of the really neat things about this app is it can trace you during the day who you've come in contact with, so that when you have to go back and try to figure out who somebody has been with, it's very simply done. I need to talk to Sister Angie about HIPAA and privacy rules and security and all that sort of thing, but this company says they have that all figured out. So just trying to figure out how to implement some things, regardless of the size of your school, is creating a lot of nice solutions and stimulating a lot of folks to think creatively. If anybody is familiar with those kinds of apps, they might, fill us in a little bit more on those things. But now I wish I was learning about this in February for August, not July to August. So we'll see how that plays out. It could be really, really helpful. Although Lisa might know more today. I don't know if we know exactly for sure what we're supposed to do if we end up with a positive case.
We're going to go to Lisa right now, but I'll just share a personal story. My wife and I went out to dinner for our anniversary this past weekend, and we got the food, and it was an outdoor, you had to eat outdoors. And when you had to pay, you prepaid, you ordered your food and then you prepaid. And so they could bring the food to you outside. And underneath the signature, they had a place for a phone number, and that's kind of standard on receipts sometimes. And I didn't fill it out the first time I just signed. And then we got some more food, so I went back in. And the second time, the guy said, please put your phone number. It's there in case we end up having an outbreak later and we need to contact you and let you know that an outbreak has happened. And I thought, oh, wow, these are the things you have to, these kind of ways to contact trace and to make sure they have people's information if they need to get back in touch with you. So it was just interesting as you were sharing, Rob, about the app, which I think is probably more technologically advanced. There's some things like that are happening as well. Lisa, I want to move to you about these questions. And we're talking about teachers and some very good practical things that the principals are thinking about at the site level. But at the diocesan level, and I'm sure you might be having kind of contacts with attorneys and those types of people, how are you thinking, with a system-wide approach about protecting teachers and staff, in addition to, of course, students, and also ensuring that kids are getting a really good education and we get them back in person, which is, I know, all our goal as soon as possible.
Yes, absolutely. And certainly the virus and health and safety are really guiding, everything, that we're doing. We typically start, thinking about a new year with teaching and learning and focused on that and how are we going to structure that. And so health and safety is the door through which we've been entering everything across the country, over all these many months. At the Archdiocese of Louisville level, we've had those discussions about our teachers and our other employees, because while we have our 49 or 48 now elementary and high schools, we also employ through our agency and all of our parishes, probably well over 3,000 people here in the Central Kentucky area. So whatever we would have for teachers is also going to be applicable for individuals coming back to work at parishes that are now reopening after being closed, and are in our agencies. So we've taken the Family First Coronavirus Act, and that is what we're using as the basis for that. We already have very well articulated leave policies in terms of sick leave for our employees throughout the Archdiocese. And as we have individuals that think that they are or know for medical reasons or just fear and anxiety, then they have the opportunity to come forward at the local level to speak with their principals, their pastors. Our head of our personnel office here at the Archdiocese has taken that and formatted some documentation. She has been working with all of our business managers throughout the Archdiocese, and certainly school leaders and other leaders over the last few days to do some webinars in terms of training. She's going to also act as a resource person in terms of working with those individuals to make sure that the right type of leave that is well known and utilized, and also work with individuals as we move through that. So we're very fortunate to have all those other layers of support and things that are in place. Just as our schools look to us at the Archdiocese, we look beyond ourselves to make sure that we've got good relationships with our local health departments, with our state health department, with our Kentucky Department of Education. And while things are not moving as quickly as we would have liked them to have moved, we are, I think, in terms of timing and access to resources, maybe better off than other parts of the country, because every state, is making decisions, and, you can hear the variance in terms of masks versus shields and interpretations of various things. So we've tried to be very connected in that area and look at the guidance that's coming out, and then look at and always apply the principles of what is reasonable, feasible, and possible, within our environments. And we look at and talk about all the different layers of protection. If we just have to depend on one thing, we're not going to be successful. But we think about all those preventative measures, the health and hygiene, the masking, the social distancing, as having all of those working in unison if indeed we want our students to come back to in-person instruction. Then we're going to have to implement that. And, I think the majority of our folks do want that, our students, our families. We're scheduled, and Archbishop has announced that we're going, to resume in-person instruction on what was previously identified as our starting date, which here in Louisville is August 12th. For our schools outside of Louisville and Central Kentucky, they start a little bit earlier, around August 5th, and that's what we're working toward. And certainly we know that's what we are planning and working toward. But as Rob said, as numbers go up, and our governor's talking later today as we continue to monitor that, we've got to continue to be flexible, nimble, and pivot, all of those new words that we're using in terms of really making sure that the teaching and learning is happening in the safest possible way, whether that's in an in-school environment or whether that is moving back to a remote learning environment, and getting our teachers, again, They learned a lot. They've been participating over the summer, professional learning. I'm totally amazed. I mean, I don't think there's anyone more flexible than a Catholic school teacher in terms of the ability, the commitment in terms of learning and growing and doing whatever is necessary to make sure that those students and young people are getting the best possible education that they possibly can.
Amen to that. I know we all agree on that sentiment. Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to go to Dave with a question. I want to just encourage everybody to please use the Q&A if you have questions, because I'll start going to the Q&A after I ask Dr. Peters a question. And if you have a specific person you're addressing the question to, please indicate that on the Q&A. And I'm also trying to go through the chat, but the chat is much harder for me to follow. So that's why I'm asking, if you have a question that you want to have answered, please just put it in the Q&A, and you can say, you know, address it to a specific person, or if it's just open-ended, you could leave it open-ended. Thanks to all for that. Dave, first I just wanted to get a better picture. You have a boarding school. Is it all boarding, or do you have some daily students as well, so that you can just answer that first? And then imagine you're thinking about it as a university might be thinking about this in terms of having kids on campus, and how long do you keep them and going through that. So have you had conversations about what happens if you have a positive case and those types of things? Obviously you've had those conversations. How are you thinking about that?
Sure. We do have day students. So we have about 2/3 of our boys are boarding students, and 1/3 are day. And then we also have a percentage of students that are 7-day boarders. Those are boys from other states, boys that are international. And so they're here 7 days. And so we formulated some policies on, you know, if there's an exposure, because what we'd like to do, or how we're thinking about it, is once they're in our dorms, we want to keep those dorms as clean and sanitized as possible. So that when they show up on campus, they're in an environment that's very clean and safe. The worry sometimes is going to be those students that go home every night and come back. And so it's looking at those as two kind of distinct groups. Then we've also had to put together some policies in terms of using the showers, how we're going to use the restrooms, those types of things, because those are communal. But we also have some rooms that we've designated as isolation rooms. And so those would be rooms, and colleges are doing this too, where they're single standalone rooms that have facilities in them. And so if we have an international student that may have to be quarantined, that we would be able to put that 7-day student in one of those rooms. Other students, if things were to happen, if they were exposed or became COVID-19 positive, the kids that are 5-day boarders are those that are local, so we would send them home, just like you would do if you would find out one of your students had to go. Now, this summer we have started, our state athletic activity association is allowing some activities like weightlifting, summer conditioning and things. So we've been doing that in our buildings, and it's very limited, but we've had, I think, 3 cases now where it wasn't one of our boys that ended up positive, but it was a family member that ended up positive. And what we did was we built pods, so it was the same boys working out at the same machine. So you keep them as tight as possible. A lot of parents want to know, yes, all these measures for keeping them safe, but they really want to know, and Rob kind of alluded to this, they really want to know what happens when you're exposed, and they really want to know what happens if someone's sick. I mean, those are the things that parents want to know. And so we had policies and directives that we sent out, said, okay, so if this happens and these guys are working at this machine, until we know, they're not coming back. They may be out for the 14 days. They might have to be tested and come back. And their family members, you know, if they're in a position, and we actually had a couple that tested positive and then later tested negative. And so it takes a lot of time. And those are the things that we've discussed here, is the fact that I think once school is up and running and we have our situation basically on campus and in the dorms, that it's going to be a lot of making determinations and decisions about these things. like a principal friend said of mine, you can have all your return plans, you can have everything, your waivers signed, you can have all this, but we're probably going to be 90% operating on the fly. And I agree with that. We're going to treat the dorms as units, and we're going to teach the rooms as units. So we're going to try to keep as compartmentalized as possible, so that if we do have a situation, that we limit the exposure. And so that's our plan right now.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that very much. Try to get through some of these questions. Rob, what was the name of the app you mentioned about the contact tracing?
I am not saying this is the greatest app. I received no commission from this app. I just learned about it this morning. Sister Angie hasn't said it's a good idea or not. But this is a local company in Louisville. Healthy Passport. It's all one word. And instead of a Y, it's an E. So HEALTHE Passport, Healthy Passport. And I think there's a number of these things on the market. This is one that was presented to us today.
Great, thank you. And Lisa, there's a request to share your personnel policies that you were talking about. And I don't know if you're willing to do that.
Yes, that'll be fine. I can put my email address in the chat box, or feel free to reach out if you would like that, and I'll be happy to share what we've done collectively with that.
Great. I'm just curious about this, and I'm going to kind of open this to the group, but we had an anonymous attendee share about in their situation, it sounds like for their teachers, they would need to indicate that there's proof that they either in a vulnerable group or they're living with someone who's in a vulnerable group. And the implication, at least, there's not really a question in this, is that you could compel a teacher to teach, even if they just didn't feel comfortable teaching. And I'm curious for you all who are in kind of practical situations, do you envision that if a teacher just expressed their own concern, how much do you pry about why they're concerned? Karen, maybe I'll just pose that to you as someone to address that.
We have been encouraged to have a conversation with that teacher, a long conversation. The first Family First COVID item that says 2 weeks with pay, that's going to be one option. Possibly looking at them taking their sick time, exhausting all time that they have, looking at FMLA, unpaid. But even with all of that, we're looking at a semester possibly without a teacher. So that's going to be really complicated. The other thing that our diocese is looking at, and it's in the attorney's hands now, is a waiver. Before all students can return, a parent has to sign a waiver for liability, and the teacher and staff member has to sign a liability waiver. So that hasn't come down to us yet, but it's expected. So I don't know. I think it's still up in the air because we don't know how litigation will happen if we are putting ourselves into a serious situation or not. But our kids come first. They have a right to be taught, and we have to do everything in our power to make sure that happens.
That's great. There was a question too about teachers whose children might attend a different school, or a teacher has to stay home because someone in their family has contracted COVID, and so they have to care for them. Obviously, there are policies to this effect if it's an immediate family member and you have to care for them. But have you thought through that, Lisa? Maybe I'll pose that to you, just in terms of a diocesan perspective. If what's your leave act or your leave policy in terms of you don't have COVID yourself, but your parent does, or a loved one does that you have to care for?
Yes, and I think Karen mentioned, I think the Family First Coronavirus Act, recognizes, a family member or a dependent in that. And then our existing leave policies outside of that, if you have a child that's ill or your mother's ill, a spouse ill, our regular sick leave and everything would allow individuals to use that leave in order to also take care of a sick family member.
Go ahead, Father Bill.
I just said, I think, again, we have the policies in place for if somebody is sick or caring for someone sick, and whether it's a heart attack or whatever the issue may be, you can have a need to be caring for family members. My concern will be, where do we find the substitute? That's the one that because I've already alluded to early on in the paneling about how we know we're going to use some of our normal long-term subs are going to now become full-time teachers for the next couple months. I mean, but so that's where the complication is going to come in. If you find out in the morning you don't have a teacher coming in, every administrator faces that every day. But you already have in place a pool of subs. And that pool of subs is going to be pretty much dried up, is my intuition. And so to work with that, it's going to take, again, some more flexibility in among the existing faculty as well, how they might be able to have to float or do something a little differently. But that's from my point of view. If somebody's sick or caring for somebody sick, that's the first priority. I understand that. I'm not going to fight them or require notes from somebody. But on the other side of it, how do we provide the classroom instruction for the kids when they're out on very short notice?
Nicole, we have a lot of chat credit thanking you for your share about what you're doing, which is wonderful. But one of the things I've heard, and I don't know anyone else could comment on this too, but because there's also a practical sense of getting kids back to school, which you see in the political conversations about this, that parents can't go back to work if their kids are learning at home, and so you need to get kids in school. So and that's obviously not something that we need to necessarily be thinking about, because health is the most important thing. But that you bring kids in, you bring young people in because they tend, and then the teacher zooms in, or the teacher is on a screen. You have an aide who's not in a vulnerable population, maybe just to kind of monitor the group. And then the teachers can teach remotely. So they're at their house, but the kids are all at school. Have you heard anything like that, or considered anything like that, and just what your thoughts are on it?
For me, I have heard of some schools doing this, and I think, we are blessed here at my school. Right now we have 14 staff kids. So our school population, our enrollment's 264. So out of 264, we have 14 staff kids, which is a blessing, but also can be detrimental when there's a virus or something going around the school. It's just the flu, it happens to hit all of us, and it hits our staff, it hits our kids. So I think having that, what we plan on doing, and so speaking to what Father Bill was saying with regards to substitutes, is I think having that teacher, let's say it's a teacher who's at home who's not ill themselves, but they have the ability to zoom in and teach and instruct the class while also taking care of their child as best they can. And then utilizing your aides who, we traditionally have an aide in our preschool, TK, kinder, and then a shared aide between, first and second. So utilizing those aides and training them to be able to be substitutes if necessary. So that way we're limiting the outside adults who come in. And if it is an extended period of time, having that teacher zoom in if they can and virtually instruct their class while they're being supervised by one of the aides. So that way we're really going to try to limit any adults that are coming to campus, taking payments over phone, finding new creative ways to do fundraising, because we really just want to protect everyone who's on campus. So obviously doing the screenings, we're going to have 3 different checkpoints of where we're going to be doing screenings every day based on grade levels. So as much as we can minimize having other adults coming on campus and utilizing our current faculty as best we can, which I feel okay having the TA being a sub for 1 day, but if it is an extended period of time, you want to make sure that the students are getting the education that they deserve. So I think having the teachers zoom in, if they have the ability to do that. I think just like I said before with the distance learning, you have to be flexible. We have to be flexible with our staff. You may have only allowed 10 sick days prior, but we have to really just work with our staff. And it's about that supporting your community so that we can all thrive together.
Great.
Kevin, can I put Father Bill on the spot?
Please do.
Thank you. Pastor,
Yes.
I ran across a friend who's a managing partner of a very large law firm in Louisville, and they've been doing telework all summer long and so forth. And I said, are you bringing everybody back to the multiple floors in your high rise middle of August? He said, oh no, we wouldn't do that. We're not ready for that. So politics aside, economics aside, academics aside, is it a moral issue to dump all these kids and teachers back into our buildings, given the risks that are involved? health-wise?
Well, I'll try to go back to my old moral theology in seminary days. We have to be making choices, regularly, and oftentimes it's between competing goods. You never want to choose the lesser of two evils, but sometimes you have to. You don't want to choose evil. But I do think that the expectation is that we do everything we can to modify it, and then ultimately people to make their own choices for themselves. I feel like I do have an obligation to provide the absolute safest environment that's possible, and make sure everybody understands what it is we're doing. So that on the other hand, the parents are the ones who make the final ultimate decision on sending their child to school or not. And it's not me saying, oh, we've got only 10 kids in a classroom, it's going to be perfectly safe, and all of a sudden I'm putting 20 kids in a classroom. That would be very immoral on my part to misrepresent what we're doing. But to say, here's what we're doing to mitigate it. Here's how we're trying to minimize what's potentially could happen. And here's how we're going to try to respond. And then you parents, make your decision as best you can. Now, we are not yet here at our particular individual school talking about giving the parents a choice. Because we do feel strongly in-person learning is the better way to go. And now we may find ourselves, even after we've alluded to, some information may come in today or come in the next couple of days, that we might need to give that option. Then we'll start working on that. Those parents want to send their kids to school. Those kids want to keep their kids at home and still try to stream. I'm giving them kind of a long, convoluted answer. Is that a specific enough answer for you, Rob? Or
I think it's a very fair answer. I appreciate you responding to that. And it's not just a moral issue for Catholic schools, it's a moral issue for every educator. It's one of those things that keeps you up at night.
Yes.
And I think all we can do is put in place as many of the smart protocols we're called to use. And whether it's for our colleagues or for our students and their families, hope that we're doing all that we can. I know that whatever setting it is, whatever type of school it is, that's what everybody's aiming for. And we need some good God grace right now.
And to make sure we keep the parents in the loop. That's the important thing, is so they make the final educated decision. I'm responsible to make every educated decision put before me to do the very best, and also to admit if I made a mistake. I may have misguessed this or that. I have to be willing to say that. I can learn. We started this way and we learned from it. This was a mistake. Or we misguessed this. But here's now what we're going to do. But also, I have an obligation to listen, to the parents if they hear, or their kids come home now. One of the old jokes we have going back, I've told this to, many of the, you hear about teachers, telling their kids, to the parents, I'm not going to believe everything the kids tell me about you. So don't you believe everything your kids first tell you about you. Talk to me, and then people will learn that out. So learn that through. So that's, I think, the way to keep us morally going forward on the right path. It's got to be constant dialogue.
Thank you.
Thanks to both of you for that. That was beautiful. And I think especially because some of this stuff has become kind of in our political conversation so negative that we have an obligation as Catholics that we want to look out, and Christians and people of faith, to think about everybody and obviously protect ourselves and our families and our communities, but make sure we're thinking about others as well. So thank you for that to both of you. Dave, I had a question came up about wearing masks in terms of, it is a burden to kind of wear them over the course of an entire day. So if you have your students wearing masks, is there a protocol for how you give them breaks, maybe outside, to take them off for a while? And is there a timing on that, or how are you thinking about
Yes, no, we're looking at that for taking breaks. Right, they cannot wear them all day. And I had a mom email me just this week. Will they be wearing them all night while they're sleeping? And I assured her no, that we would not. That would not be happening. So yes, it would be a timing issue, and it's also going to be a location issue. You know, where are they on our grounds? We have a big campus. We're huge, 440 acres, and so we have a lot of space, and we're going to be utilizing some of that space moving forward. But you know, when they're in closed spaces and everything you've read, you know, closed spaces for X amount of time, they're going to be needing to wear those masks. And but when they're outside, in the dorms, those types of, that's when we're going to give them some breaks and have them take them off.
That's great. Thank you. So there's a question. Does anyone have a policy or suggestion about an exposed student or employee to have a negative COVID-19 test? So they'd have to, if they've been diagnosed and then they recover, do you have to give them another test? And I think this gets to some of the information that we probably don't yet have about immunity and about, you know, whether that can happen. I'm just sorry, I got a little distracted because I think Lisa's going to have to leave us in just a minute or two. So Lisa, we're grateful to you for your time. Maybe I'll just pose that question to you about,
Well,
have you thought?
Yeah, it's a great segue because my meeting at 1 o'clock is on contact tracing with our health department here in Louisville. So we're going to follow our guidance of our local health department, you know, here. And so they're really going to be the ones that are going to, you know, call the ball on that, you know, for us. So we hope to have more information about how that process is going to work. And then we'll share that with our schools, because teachers need to know that, principals need to know that, parents need to know that, because what's going to happen if someone tests positive, and if that child or adult is in our community, then how's that process going to work? So again, thank you all so much for the opportunity. I'm going to need to head out. So thanks, Kevin, and thanks to everyone, and I hope everyone has continued you know, working well on your plans as we continue to work together heading to that new year. So thank you. I'll see you
Thanks,
later.
Lisa, very
Bye-bye.
much. Thank you, Lisa, very much. And we'll start to wrap up now too. And if you have any final questions, attendees, please go ahead and post those. But I'd like everyone to kind of do is just think about, do you have one piece of advice or recommendation for someone in your similar role? So an elementary principal for Nicole, or a pastor for Father Bill, as they're moving through, is there something that you've really held on to, or that you think is critical as they prepare for the new year? And Father Bill, we'll start with you. Put you on the spot for that.
Unmute myself. Well, I think we've all, at least I can say myself, going forward, some of the things lesson I want to take with me is that there is ways in which we can be more creative. I mean, I've always thought of myself as being open and creative. Those who know me know I have a very playful side. I actually do clown with makeup. I do kind of circus-like clowning and do some stuff. So I have a very open, playful side to me. But be open to new and creative ways that I can't even think of, and that's where I think the children can teach us. One of the running jokes, if I'm having a little problem with my computer here, my kindergarten is just down the hallway from the office area. I can get a kindergartner in here to do it. I might not be able to, but that kindergartner can. That's again being a little silly, but the fact is, I think children need to teach us, also. What are ways that they learn better if we're using this kind of environment? That means asking them. Parents don't know necessarily what's the best way, for kids in this environment either. So to find out what they've learned about it themselves, and most will be pretty straightforward and honest. I mean, some will say, well, it's always boring or whatever, I want to be with friends, all that stuff, but I think it can help us. But I also know that there has been a cost involved in us going down this road. And as a pastor, not being able to, celebrate these great events in their life. you know, how we all struggle. There's a single person who's been watching this hasn't struggled with the lack of graduation. We've all struggled with, as a parish, the delay in sacrament and things like that. So let's count the cost too, and not ignore the pain and struggle that have happened, but to learn from them, be more flexible, be more adaptive, and policies are going to have to adapt and change. I mean, we live and die by them. I understand that, but we're going to still have to be always open and flexible. That's part of what I'm taking away.
That's great. Karen, how about you? Is there something that you've been thinking about or that you would advise someone, the high school opening in the fall? What would you recommend?
I think the most useful thing for us as we move along has been the communication. The more we communicate and get the pulse rate of not just the parents, but the students, very, very important. Our students who are on plans to get their feelings on it, our counselors, et cetera. I think that's been very important to us moving forward. The other thing is we have made a concerted effort moving forward to figure out how we're going to get liturgy in. How are we going to be able to celebrate liturgy with our kids? Because that is a piece that's missing, has been missing, and we need to get it back in there somehow, some way. So that's going to be a challenge because it means more mass time because we'll have to separate the groups and we don't have the priest power. So that's going to be a real challenge, but also an opportunity. So we need to figure out how to do that.
I'll follow up on, I'm sorry, I'll follow up on that real quick. One thing that we are looking at doing is zooming masses into the classroom. Still having a grade come to mass. We actually were doing that in April and in May. We were live streaming one day a week when we traditionally had an all-school mass, and we would have people through the Facebook reacting to me. I would put out a dialogue, just like I would a regular kid's homily, and I was getting feedback all during that homily time, and it went extremely well. And sometimes parents were typing for their kids, but I'm thinking that one option might be streaming into the classroom. But I still want to have some live bodies. I've got to have some kids, there. So that's just one option.
That's great, thanks. And I just want to highlight, Karen, as you closed out your thoughts, you talked about it being a challenge and also an opportunity. And I think it's such a great thing to keep in mind too, that all these challenges are all opportunities too. And so how we think about that. So thank you. Rob, how about you? Piece of advice to share to the community.
Well, it's a piece of advice. I don't know if I follow it enough. Might not be exactly what you were suspecting. We got to take care of ourselves, each of us. A lot of people are relying on us, our decisions, and our mood and our approach. It is a struggle for everybody, and including us. So we need to be healthy, each of us, for the sake of our communities.
Great. Thank you for that. And Dave, how about you? Other boarding schools out there and thinking about it in terms of, right?
Well, I think what I've been learning, and this started last spring, was the generosity of people, of our parents, of our community, and our alums. We had our normal, normally in the spring we have our annual fundraising dinner, and we did that virtually. In the outpouring for our community, because that money, we need that money for operation. We need that money to pay salaries, and it was absolutely nothing short of impressive. And so then we started a campaign on tuition assistance, because we have a lot of our families that have been impacted, and we want to help them. And there are a lot of our students and families that we already help, and we want to continue to help. And I know we've all been hit with the economics of this. And so I have learned, and even going forward, that you just have to ask. You just have to put that out there. Everybody say, you're going to try to do some type of campaign now. Well, yes, it's for tuition assistance. We've done it, and it's been tremendous. And I think people want to give. I think those that are associated with our institution, whether directly or indirectly, when they hear of the need, especially when we're talking about a Catholic school education, there are a lot of supporters out there. and we've seen just a wonderful response to that.
Wonderful. And Nicole, how about you? Some advice, recommendations to those listening?
I think this is just another opportunity to evolve and grow. Kevin, you having known me for a long time and my vision as an administrator, I was always the first one to jump into any kind of pilot that was asked of me. I'm always willing to grow and expand. We started doing blended learning before most schools have ever heard of it. Last year, we started a Finland initiative. So I was lucky to go to Finland and learn some of their educational practices that we brought back into place last year, which is all about community. And we have these cool Finnish style desks, which now I cannot use at all because we have to distance our kids. But, just another opportunity. It's as scary as it is. It's an exciting time to be in education because it's a totally new era of education, and it's a way to just evolve on what we do. And we're able to create a path for educators in the future, and just be very creative in how we instruct our students. And so I just think that if we just look at it with gratitude that we've been put in this position to help our students to grow, body, mind, and soul, I think that would make the job much more simple. But at the end of the day, like Rob said, we really have to take care of ourselves as well. So, you have to take care of ourselves, make sure we're healthy, and also take care of those that are working with us, and make sure that our teachers are healthy, body, mind, and spirit as well.
Great. So that was just some great advice from our panel. And I'll just highlight really pastoral care, always communicate, focus on liturgy, see challenges as opportunities, take care of yourself, just acknowledge and the generosity of people. And it's an opportunity to evolve and grow, and it's a new era of education. So I want to thank each and every one of you, and Lisa also, for sharing with us today your expertise. We'll keep you all in our prayers, and of course, all those who are listening to us as they transition and open to this new school year. We know it'll be like none other in our lifetimes, and we're keeping you all in our prayers. So thank you very much. And Jonathan, I'll turn it over to you to see if there are any final housekeeping notes.
Great. Thanks so much to everyone joining us. And thanks, Kevin, as well as all of our panelists. So you can find a link to the post-session evaluations in the chat box. It's also on the event page. We invite you to check that out. We appreciate your feedback, and we hope to see you for the next session this afternoon on technology and online learning on YouTube Premiere. So once again, thank you for joining us. Have a blessed rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.